Okay, you sons of bitches. I've had enough of this shit. Everybody else makes a top 10, a top 15, a top 20, a top 25. Little old Alex never does any of that shit. I enjoy watching them. I don't like making them. Why? Because they're never accurate. I've already mentioned what my top XYZ games are of all time several freaking times. So for me to do a list like this, if you've been watching a while, it's kind of predictable. Final Fantasy II is, or 4 technically, is my favorite game of all time. But it's not number one on this list, actually. So what I decided to do to make this a little bit more interesting, because this is top 25 RPGs, I am going for RPGs that gave me some form of emotional response, and I am omitting visual novels. Now, you may think, okay, visual novels can technically be an RPG, or they technically could not be an RPG. But I'll be honest with you, if I left visual novels on here without any form of gameplay whatsoever, they would pretty much dominate this list. So without further ado, this is my top 25 RPGs. The Outer Worlds? Really? Actually, I'll be honest with you, I was not looking forward to this game whatsoever. I saw the trailer at E3 and I thought, okay, I guess they're trying to go for a kind of sort of funny Fallout sort of thing. And it's Obsidian, and I'll be honest with you, Obsidian has some great writers, but I'm pretty 50-50 on their games. Fallout New Vegas, probably some of the best stories of all time within the Fallout universe in that game, and I got a game-breaking glitch and couldn't beat the fucking thing. So, why is this even on the list? I'll be honest with you. It was on Game Pass, so that made the barrier of entry a lot easier. And second of all, within probably the first 10-15 minutes, I realized this wasn't a silly, funny Fallout game in space. This was a Guardians of the Galaxy simulator. And in case you don't know, I really like the Guardians. And Quill, Star-Lord, is my boy. Some people are a little bit disappointed about this up-and-coming Guardians of the Galaxy game where you're kind of sort of just pigeonholed into playing him. I'm thrilled, because he's my guy. But Outer Worlds was so much fun in the essence of it had some of that Fallout skeleton to it, but at the same time it also brought you into, the intergalactic, and it had fun with it. You basically just assemble a ragtag group of misfits and you just run around the galaxy doing right or doing wrong, and it's hysterical throughout. It has some of that Fallout sarcasm, but ultimately I really just feel like it just capitalizes on the fact that Guardians of the Galaxy were hot at the time. Is that necessarily where the writing came from? I don't know, but it makes sense to me. Kudelka. Now, some of you may be looking at this and going, I have no fucking clue what this is. Some people may think, hey, that's an expensive game. Or if you were me, hey, this is a RPG with S&K on it? I'm intrigued. I'll put it to you this way. This is pretty much a JRPG meets Resident Evil. And I did not play it when it came out. Actually, I purchased it based on a whim because I saw it on some video on YouTube years and years and years and years ago, and it wasn't half as expensive or well known as it is today. I didn't even know it was somewhat related to Shadow Hearts at the time. I really didn't. I just saw the SNK logo. I love SNK. I thought, okay, let's buy it. Several years later, as YouTube video game collecting goes, I finally got around to playing this game, and I was so, how could I put it, not surprised, but shocked that I had not heard of this game earlier and had not played this game earlier. Some people will say it's unforgiving, some people will say it's kind of random. I gotta be honest with you, the atmosphere is great, the voice acting is cheesy, the dialogue is horrible, but when I tell you, I had such a great experience with this game, I had so much fun playing this game, campiness and all, that's ultimately what makes these games fun for me, or just games in general. If you can look at all this stuff, shake your head and go, oh my god, this is terrible, and still have fun with it, that's a good fucking game. Okay, I'm gonna be honest here. If you were to say, really, this is your favorite Ys game, I want to say it was, because it was. And then I played Oath and Felghana on the PSP. And after fighting that last boss, that quickly became my favorite Ys game of all time. But Ys Origin holds a really special place in my heart because it's really the first Ys game I ever played. And I went through all three characters one after another in quick succession, no breaks in between. I love the combat in this game. The story is very straightforward and easy to follow. The boss fights are epic. The music is to die for. And I actually played it on Steam once it finally got localized over here. I believe it was Xseed who was still handling it at the time. And I got to be honest with you. Initially, I was a little put off the character sprites. You know, it's that Falcom engine that they used to death for several years. But when I tell you, it never, ever felt boring, man, that really opened up the floodgates for this whole series for me. Falcon is still better, though. And still better than 8. Now, as far as the Atelier games go, Verona, honestly, is my favorite of the bunch. It was the first one I played, and I honestly think that's really because after finishing that game, I realized, hey, I just went through pretty much a year of this girl's life. I didn't save the world or do anything ridiculous. I was literally just trying to keep a business afloat. So down to earth. A little anime, of course, but so down to earth, so fun, so just being able to see characters grow in their everyday lives. I mean, ultimately, Verona's pretty bungling, and throughout the trilogy, all of a sudden she becomes like a savant alchemist, but in those humble beginnings and just seeing some of those anime tropes, but ultimately it's more slice of life than anything, as somebody who really doesn't like slice of life, I was so satisfied with the ending. I was so satisfied just going through it, and ultimately it turned me on to the entire series. So of course, this got a big response out of me. It's really still my favorite in the series. Although technically, I will say the other games are much better. Now, I know I've spoken about the Illusion of Gaia before. This game came out at pretty much the right place and right time for me. I was subscribed to Nintendo Power. I was studying world history in grammar school. I must have been like 4th or 5th grade when I was super into that stuff at the time. And all of a sudden we hear about this game called Illusion of Gaia that involves time travel, who knew? And going through these different time periods that I was actively studying at the time. And just being able to do, you know, your average action RPG stuff, which was great. But graphically in Nintendo Power, the thing looked realistic for the time. You know, going through, I think it was the Angkor Wat, I could not believe I was studying this and going through it and just seeing it firsthand. Now, the US version, I will admit, has some liberties taken with the editing. The cannibalism stuff was taken out. Religious imagery was toned down a bit. But you got a sweet t-shirt out of it. And I'll be honest with you, I had this shirt up until maybe, I'll say, 15 years ago. You could not even see the Illusion of Gaia logo anymore on it. It was ripped to shreds. And truthfully as well, I really had to use that strategy guide that came with the game. Not so much like the one Earthbound did. This was actually the manual. The back of the manual was the Nintendo Power Guide. And pretty much I went page for page on that thing. But out of the entire Quintet trilogy between Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and Terranigma, Illusion of Gaia is definitely one of my favorites, but I'm not telling you which one is my absolute favorite. Now, admittedly, Star Ocean: The Last Hope has a lot of fans. It has a lot of detractors. Some people just don't like the game at all. Some people find the story boring. Some people find the main character, Rex, to be the worst protagonist in the history of JRPGs. And I'll be honest with you, I love this game. But I love it for a different reason than you may think. This was the last game that my uncle bought me for Christmas before he passed away. I got this along with the strategy guide. And at this point, I hate to say it, he and I, we didn't lose touch, but it was more so like in years past when he was able to just know immediately, Alex is gonna like that game. Alex is gonna like that game. He was really like pulling at hairs at this point, just because I was doing my own thing. I was really just playing Final Fantasy XI at the time, mainly, and just going to work. And then this one Christmas, I got this game in the strategy guide, and he said, I remember you liked this game back on the PlayStation, so I thought you'd like this one. And it wasn't until after he passed away that I actually started to play it. And it became a nightly ritual. Turn off the lights, light a candle, drink a lot of Diet Coke, more than I probably should, and just play Star Ocean until about 10:30 at night. And I really even fell in love with the characters. I fell in love with the story, as bad as it is. I also played it in the Japanese dialogue, which I highly recommend. But you know what? It's honestly one of my favorite RPGs of all time, just because I have that memory attached to it. And just knowing it was like his one last hurrah, I was like, man, you still picked a fucking good one. Now, Odin Sphere is kind of a mixed bag here, and I don't mean mixed bag as I don't like it. It's vanillaware. How could I not like it, right? I originally played Odin Sphere on the PS2, and I thought the game was great then. But then you announce an HD remaster, HD remake, revamp, battle system, all that stuff. You take an already great game and you make it better? Hot shit. But here's the kicker with the whole thing. Replaying this game, it was like I was back when it was released on the PS2. When it was released on the PS2, I still lived with my parents. I was rocking a CRT television in my bedroom and I had a Murphy bed. That is where my head went while playing this game the entire time. Even the parts I did not remember, even the parts I did not fully experience, even with all the new stuff, it felt like I was in a time capsule. That is ultimately what games are supposed to do. They're supposed to take you out of the reality and they're supposed to plant you into a different location, a different time and place, and remove all the stresses from the outside. Unless it's an FPS online, in which case I'm probably just cursing at the television. I gotta preface this with something. Yakuza 5, honestly, is the biggest and the best of the 6 games. Yakuza 6, on the other hand, has probably one of the most tragic yet satisfying endings I've ever seen in a series. Because Kazuma Kiryu's story is done. You know it's done. Even he knows it's done before it's done. But here's the thing, too. You get to see some of the best growth in this guy. Throughout the entire series, you saw him start off as just a regular Yakuza, to a Yakuza with a heart of gold, to a father figure. And now, he's technically a dad, I guess you could say. And here's the thing that really gets me the most. I'm not going to go into spoilers, but this part really, really got me to the point of tears. There is a sort of phenomenon that occurs when a parent sees their child in danger. Basically, all of the restrictors on the brain will shut off, allowing an individual to go through incredible feats of strength without any ramifications of hurting themselves or anything else. Parents, mothers, dads have lifted entire cars. There is a moment in this game where this happens. And I gotta tell you, that particular moment in time, when you realize like those restrictors in Kazuma's brain are off, dude, you know it's gonna be a fucking bloodbath. And that was probably one of the most intense, awesome sequences in the entire game. Hey, why don't you look at that? Cold Steel 2. So I did an individual video on this, but for those who haven't watched or just don't have the patience to go through half an hour of me rambling, like that's any different. Cold Steel 2 has probably one of the best endings out of the 4 games, for me personally. It was satisfying, it was sad, and it was really the only way it could go. And I'll be honest, I cried. I fucking cried like a baby throughout the whole thing. And that's what I'm talking about here. Cold Steel 2 is my favorite out of the 4. But this particular ending, if it had occurred in any of the other games, would have knocked it right into this list immediately. It was that good. And that's sad. Now, technically, this probably should have been Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy the 4 Heroes of Light. But I gotta give it to Bravely Default. Why is that? So, Final Fantasy IV Heroes of Light was basically just a spin-off game that they just tacked Final Fantasy on, but it's basically a beta test for Bravely Default. It really uses that sort of classic Final Fantasy style where you pick a job, you switch around the job classes, and you ultimately just break the shit out of the battle system. And that's ultimately what is my favorite part about the Bravely games. Second only to the amazing battle music that these games put out. But Bravely Default, when it came out over here, it was already out in Japan and people were talking about it and was one of those, are we going to get it or should we get it? Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And eventually it did. And coming off of 4 Heroes of Light, I went immediately into Bravely Default and I did not look back. I love Agnes. I love Ring a Bell. He's probably one of my favorite RPG characters of all time. Tiz I thought was great too, but here's the thing though. I felt so, I guess you could say, connected to these characters because they have story arcs, but they're not super intense. And they're ultimately, because you could be any job, you could have just had four homunculus or four homunculi and it would have been fine. Or basically just four blank canvases, and you could have just gone through the whole game with some silly story segments and be done with it. But no, you actually had development between them and the other asterisk holders, and it was so much fun. It knew when to poke fun of itself, it knew when to break the fourth wall, it knew just when to say, okay, well, if we do this, this, and this, you know what, that's going to be broken. Awesome, do it anyway. So Valkyrie Chronicles, I actually found out about, believe it or not, from a video review on GameSpot, of all things, right? Remember that when you actually had to go to other websites to see video reviews and not YouTube? So with Valkyrie Chronicles, it was done on this whole thing called the Canvas engine. And at the time, I was getting back into games. I was living by myself. And I remember the day I bought this game. I bought this game, Disgaea 3, and Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, on the same day from a GameStop that has since moved and been knocked down because of 2020, amongst other things, right? But when I got home, I basically sat down with these three games, and I had to decide which one I was going to play, because at this point in my life, whenever I bought a game, it was bought so I could finish it, because I honestly just didn't have a lot of expendable income at the time. So I opted to play Valkyrie Chronicles because hearing about the Canvas engine, seeing how it played out, to me just sounded really, really interesting. And it was a strategy RPG, but it was a bit more of like an action-y sort of system. And playing through this game, I really fell in love with the characters. Yeah, they were a little tropey. Yeah, Vice was a secret character. Vice was not a secret character, or was he a secret character? Either way, I didn't know who the fuck he was at the time, believe it or not, because I wasn't paying attention to games really. I was just getting back into it, and I had a PS3, and I was just rocking with that, and it was fully backwards compatible. May it rest in peace. But here's the thing with Valkyrie Chronicles. There is a particular mission where something happens to a member of the team, and I'm being vague for reasons here. I did not see it coming. Now, years later, having played a bunch of games and seen a bunch of movies and everything else, I can kind of predict when these things are going to happen because it's meant to propel the story and the characters forward. When this happened, I literally put my hand to my mouth. I was in shock. I put the controller down, and I basically just had to stand up. I was in complete shock that this could happen to this particular group of people. And from there, I was like, you know what? It's personal now. I gotta finish this game. And I had to go through all the stupid fucking tank battles that y'all may know about. And I managed to finish one of those stupid tank battles in 5 turns. I don't know how. I have never been able to duplicate it. I hope to never duplicate it. But if you're going to play any game in this series, do yourself a favor. Please, please, please play this first one. It's everywhere. It is so good. Okay, listen, everybody has their favorite Dragon Quest game, all right? Mine happens to be 5. 11 is a much better game. Admittedly, 11 is a much better game. 4, I think for me, was probably the most engaging. It was the most exciting. It was the most like, oh cool, now we get this guy, and now we get this gal, and all this stuff. 5 is just epic beyond belief, though. It is literally 3 generations of heroes. It literally starts with you as a baby, and it ends with you as a dad. That's insane. That is amazing. And here's the thing with Dragon Quest V. Admittedly, I think this probably has one of the better stories out of the almost 12 games we've had so far. I think this one really pushes the envelope. Admittedly, probably because it was on the Super Nintendo and the PS2, and they were just able to do a lot more than they were on the NES. Unfortunately, it took forever and a day to get here, and I didn't play it until it was on the DS. But here's the thing that really made me want to play this game. I couldn't get it. I couldn't find it. I had just gotten back into game collecting, and everybody was telling me DQ5 is the one to play. And I even finished it while I was on YouTube when I first started, and I did a video on it. And I was just like, I can't believe how much fun this game was. At the time, the game was expensive. The game was, I think, 50, 60 bucks. Which you may be thinking, wow, that's actually pretty cheap. That was brand new, by the way. And Alex, the cheap ass he is, just refused to pay it and decided he was going to track down a used copy at the local GameStops at the time because there was tons of them in Manhattan. And I honestly liked wandering around looking for games. PS2 games were there, all that stuff. GameCube, everything. And one day I'll tell you about the $11 Radiant Dawn I got complete at GameStop. So, looking for this game became kind of a pet project. And the app had just rolled out, right? So I looked it up on the app. Sure enough, ironically, the GameStop 5 blocks from me had it. Run over there, and it's card only. And at this point, I'm like, okay, my rule with DS games, it has to be complete in box. I really want to play this game. I wasn't aware of R4 cards or any of that stuff. So I bought this cart with full intention of playing it and eventually replacing it down the way. The cart didn't work, as it is when you buy used products from GameStop. That's why they have a 7-day return policy. So it didn't work, wouldn't boot up, wouldn't do anything, cleaned the contacts, eventually booted up, but it wouldn't save. So I had to bring it back. So a friend of mine called me, because she knew I was looking for this, and said, hey, I found Dragon Quest V, do you want it? And I was like, oh, yeah. I was like, how much do I owe? She's like, oh, I got it at GameStop. It was like $30. So I'm like, okay, cool. She comes over, I go, oh, which GameStop did you get it at? Because I was curious, because I didn't see it on the app. It was the same fucking GameStop I returned it to. Motherfuckers put it right back on the shelf. So I told her, listen, it doesn't work. And she's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, because I returned that one. So I eventually went on eBay and I bought a used one for $45 begrudgingly and played through the game. There's damage on the case art. I think there's like a hole in the back. It's barely even noticeable, but playing through this game, going through all of this, I was like, I am playing this game fucking immediately. And I absolutely loved it. This was actually the third Dragon Quest game I ever played. My first one was 7, which was a mistake. And then it was 4. And then it was 5. And to this day, 5 is still my favorite out of the bunch. Pour one out for Chrono Cross. Listen, I'm actually a fan of Chrono Cross. I think it has one of the most beautiful soundtracks of all time. And I love all the interdimensional stuff that everybody doesn't like. And the battle system, as random as it is, it's kind of fun. So why is Chrono Trigger on the list instead? Well, you may be thinking, well, it's the better game. I don't know if it is. Chrono Trigger, to me, just has a special place. So, when Chrono Trigger came out, presumably around the time it came out, I was living downtown, and we lived relatively near to a Toys R Us. And if you guys are from New York, you may remember the Toys R Us used to be a Kitty City Toys right off of Union Square. So, anytime we walked by, it was pretty much one of those things where my parents had to rush me by for fear of me going, hey, can we stop inside? Because they were ultimately in line for a police job. So, I was really at the bay of commercials, on actual TV. And getting ready for school, all of the, I guess, channel 11, 5, 7, and 9. No, more so 5, 9, and 11. WB, UPN, and Fox. Pretty much during like that 6 to 8 a.m. time frame, they would do a lot of, toy and video game related commercials because they knew kids were getting ready for school. And it worked very well, actually. I saw advertisements for Secret of Evermore. I saw advertisements for Super Mario World. I saw advertisements for all the toys I grew up with. And I eventually saw an advertisement for Chrono Trigger. And I knew nothing about Chrono Trigger. I didn't know if it was an RPG. I didn't know if it was an action game. But when you see a giant fucking rainbow frog drop out of the sky, you are curious as hell as what this game is actually about. Eventually, Nintendo Power kind of shed some light on it. And I didn't know who Akira Toriyama was. I didn't know who Yuji Horii was. I didn't know who any of these guys were at the time. But for whatever reason, something about the character design, which I didn't know about DBZ either, or Dragon Ball, something about it spoke to me. Something about it looked really exciting. Something made me want to play it. So I told my mom, hey, I want to play this Chrono Trigger game. The unfortunate thing is, this was one of the more expensive Super Nintendo games at the time, pushing $90 because of the chips that were in it. Now, if you find it for $90, wow, that's a fucking deal. You may as well buy two. But here's the thing, though. When I eventually got it, after hiding several tickets at Toys R Us behind games nobody wanted, and systems, including the Sega Nomad, I eventually got it. My mom basically had to put pennies and stuff aside because financially it wasn't very easy for us to do at the time. And I get the game, bring it home, and I did not want to play it. I was too intimidated to play it. I didn't know how to get my head around, combos and not combos, combinations and all that stuff. I had no idea what to do with any of it. And the time travel, and I honestly thought the time travel was pretty free flowing, so I wasn't sure like if I was going to do it right, if I figure out how to beat the game, all this stuff. But it came with a card to actually order the strategy guide. And once again went back to my mom, and she was like, "So let me get this straight. I bought you a $90 game, and now I gotta get you a $30 or a $24 strategy guide to go with it, so you know how to play it." About 2 weeks later, I got the strategy guide. I went through the whole game, and I got every single ending. That's pretty epic for one damn game. So here's the thing with Final Fantasy XII. I'm a huge fan. I was a huge fan when it came out back in the day when everybody else didn't like it. I was a huge fan of the Zodiac Age, and I've only done it once, and I will probably never do it again. I legitimately killed every single elite monster in the original PS2 version. It was hard, it was painful, but here's the thing. At the time, I was working at my first hotel job. I was a sales assistant, and we were doing a promotion at the hotel, and basically the winner got an iPod, like legit old school spinny spin iPod. That was it. So my boss had ordered it from the Best Buy I think it was in Soho, and mentioned to them that her assistant B was going to be stopping by to pay for it and pick it up. So they said, "Okay, no problem, cool." I go over there, and apparently we needed an authorization letter for me to use her credit card, so I had to run back to the hotel, get her to sign an authorization thing and all this other crap, and then I had to run back to the Best Buy, pick this thing up. So I call her, and at this point she's like, "Listen, just take lunch. Like, it's fine, whatever." So this Best Buy was about a block and a half away from an EB Games. And it was a small EB Games. If you're in Manhattan, you may even know about the one I'm talking about. It was very small, had like glass windows and red banners and all that stuff. So I walk in, and apparently Final Fantasy XII had just come out. So I was like, "Oh, cool." And I was playing Final Fantasy XI at the time, religiously. So the fact that Final Fantasy XII came out and I didn't know pretty much tells me I was living under a rock, because I was in a link shell that was filled with people that played games and nobody had mentioned it. So I figured, why not? It's payday, I guess, or presumably it was. So I bought the game, and I bought the strategy guide, which was about yay thick, and brought it back to the hotel with my iPod, and basically worked the whole day, got home, got on Final Fantasy XI instead of playing Final Fantasy XII, and was like, "Hey guys, when did Final Fantasy XII come out?" They're like, "Oh dude, it came out today. I can't find it anywhere." And I was like, "Really? I just bought the Steelbook version." Like, I literally just walked in, no reservation, no nothing. And I started to play it. Now here's the sad thing, the tragic thing, and the amazing thing. In Final Fantasy XI, at this point, I was in the endgame scene, which was a lot of what we called notorious monsters. Basically standing around in a room for 3 to 4 hours, hoping a dragon would show up, and hoping nobody else would get it before you did. And then if you did get it, hoping it dropped stuff you wanted. That was pretty much what we were doing all the time. If you've played an MMO before, think of a raid, but it's not really a raid. It's just people standing in the room for a world pop. Think of it like that. But Final Fantasy XI was all this, and I loved it. I thought it was fun. Truthfully, I have a lot of good memories, but time sync, not so much. So Final Fantasy XII was great for that, because while we were waiting for notorious monsters, I could go fight other notorious monsters. Because at that point in time, I was more so into just fighting big, obnoxious bosses. Because to me, that was always the most fun thing. And to this day, anytime I have to fight a dragon, I'm like, "Oh man, this is it. This is it. This is my jam." And Final Fantasy XII had nothing but huge fights. And they all had different pop conditions. You had to go at night, or maybe you had to do a certain thing, or you had to have a certain number of steps. And each boss was unique in and of itself. Certain ones you could only trigger at certain points in the story, which admittedly at the time I thought was pretty bleh. Having replayed on the Zodiac Age, it's actually pretty damn good. But the characters at the time, the way the game was designed, it was very much a time and place thing too. Star Wars was big. This was baby's first gig. And this game just has so many, not even nods, just I guess you could say references in the design and the way the tech looks in relation to Lord of the Rings and, the Star Wars prequel trilogy. There was a lot of it, and at the time, this was like hot shit. So being able to be time and place and relevant at the time that the game actually came out, and playing a game fighting notorious monsters that we weren't able to get every single time, but being able to fight an Asphodoshalon or a Behemoth King or something like that while playing this one was amazing. And I actually had different save files in front of where the bigger, I guess you could say the bigger, more fun fights for me were, just so I could replay them over and over again and play with the Gambit system. As a micromanager, this battle system was amazing. Now with Lunar Eternal Blue, we could be talking about the Sega CD version, or we could be talking about the PS1 version. This is more so, once again, logo is for the complete version, but I'm really talking about the Sega CD version. So with Lunar, Silver Star, and Eternal Blue, truthfully, Silver Star is my favorite of the two. But Eternal Blue has a different, more special place. And it actually takes place across 3 different instances in my life. The first instance was actually when I beat the game. You see, my best friend was sleeping over at the time, and it was on the Sega CD, so we were relatively young at the time. And basically, he would come over, we basically just swap sleepovers at each other's homes, and we would just do what we normally did. We were just happy to hang out. So this particular instance, he comes over, and I'm like, hey dude, how's it going? I'm playing Lunar. He's like, oh, what are you playing? I'm like, oh, I'm playing Lunar Eternal Blue, the sequel to Lunar Silver Star. And he had never played them. He eventually got Silver Star Complete and Eternal Blue Complete on the PS1, and even he was like, dude, now I understand why you stayed up till 4 o'clock in the fucking morning just to beat Eternal Blue. This is amazing. This is great. And yeah, that's actually what happened. He came over, and I just kept playing and playing. He went to sleep. He woke up. He peed. I was still playing. At one point, he woke up. He goes, is this over yet? And I was just starting the epilogue. And I was like, I have to see it in the end. And he was just like, dude, go to sleep. But he got it. Like, you know, he watched the whole epilogue with me. And then years later when he played, he goes, you know, I think I would be enjoying this game a lot more than I am if I already know the fucking ending, you know? Second instance. Obviously, the complete version. When this was announced to be coming out, I was so thrilled. I was so excited. I love the Silver Star Complete. And much like every Working Designs game, it's like a moving target and borderline vaporware. You never know when it's going to come out. I didn't even know Eternal Blue Complete came out. My uncle just showed up with it one day, and he was like, here it is. I didn't even say hi. I didn't say I love you. I didn't give him a hug or a kiss, hello, or anything. Kind of just took it, put it in the system, and he's like, okay, everything is as it should be. And that was pretty much the end of it. And here's the thing, though, with Eternal Blue. And this isn't really the second instance. The second instance was when he got me the original Sega CD version. And also with this one, he remembered that when he got me Eternal Blue on the Sega CD, the opening scene with Lucia, with no clothes on, he was a little surprised, to say the least. With Eternal Blue, he was like, now, is this the one with the naked woman walking around in the beginning? I was like, yeah, it is. He was like, okay, don't tell your mother I bought you this. Like, he had no idea. And then the third instance is actually relatively recent. A few years ago, at Too Many Games, like, as of this recording, back when events and conventions and things were a thing, I got myself a copy of Eternal Blue Complete on the Sega CD with Stevo Supremo now. And it was literally one of those instances where I knew I was going to leave with this whether I wanted to or not. I had gone to a booth that I had always, it's a store up in upstate New York, and I had brought a bunch of stuff, and I was like, are you willing to trade for any of this stuff? And it was literally stacks upon stacks of games. And the booth owner, who's also the owner of the store, went through all of them, and ultimately he's like, I can only take this one, which was Stubbs the Zombie. And I was like, but dude, there's a lot of good stuff here. He's like, yeah, but I know at a show like this, I will sell Stubbs the Zombie. This stuff, it's going to sit. He's like, it's going to sell at the store on eBay. Like, it's not going to sell here. But I can't fault hustle. The guy saw me looking at this. He knew I was going to buy it, regardless. But it was one of those things. He was being patient, and then he eventually just said to me, listen, you're not going to find a better copy at the show. I guarantee you of that. And I just looked at him, and I just said, yeah, fuck it. How much do I owe you? And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. I've since kept it in the case since. And Even Steven had said, I don't think I have seen such a clean copy. This thing is like literally the person took it out of the shrink wrap and just put it on a shelf. But this was like literally one of like those amazing video game collecting moments where I was able to take something that I thought at the time wasn't all that great, which was Stubbs the Zombie, and change it and trade it into something that held a lot of nostalgia for me and a lot of significance. And being able to do that, I mean, that's what makes this hobby so great. Some people may think of it as reselling and whatnot, but being able to do this and be with like a really good friend of mine, just for him to go like, you made the right choice, or at least he told me at the time. You're probably thinking afterwards, dude, you spent too much fucking money. But it felt good and it was great, and it's also just, it was really exciting just to be able to say I finally own it again. For all the fan service, for all the anime, for all the nonsense that goes into these Xeno games, I love Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I couldn't have been happier with the cast. I love how everybody got a moment. I love how everybody had development. I love the fact that they kept the British voice acting. And I also love the fact that they purposely got people from different countries within Europe so that you could have different voices. They had Welsh, they had English, they had Scottish. It was Irish, I think, even showed up, and I think there was an Italian accent in there too. And then, of course, your standard, like, deadpan American voice acting. But it was so much fun, and it was so much bigger than the sum of its parts. And it was also, and hear me out, better than Xenoblade Chronicles. And here's why. I love Shulk. I love Runtime. Dumban is my boy. Naked tanking for the win, always. But the cast in this game, I felt like you literally saw growth. You saw, what's the word I want to use? You saw struggle within each of the different characters. Rex has a lot of struggle. Pyra especially. Mithra even has a lot of struggle when she shows up in it. And you see growth within every single character. And with Xenoblade Chronicles 1, Dunban's moment kind of fades pretty quick. At least I think so. Shulk's pretty much keeps going the whole time, and Ryan's ends as soon as it begins, in my opinion. But Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it's really like they took whatever worked with the first game, they built it out, and they made it bigger and better. And the fact that now it's basically just different islands allowed for so much more variety. But I'll tell you one thing. If it's one thing the Xenoblade games know how to do, it's epic. In Xenoblade Chronicles 2, even the expansion is just as epic and is especially a must-own on the Switch. When they eventually print more, because I understand it's like stupid rare and expensive now. So admittedly, the last bunch has just been me gushing about games. But that's really just because these games have just elicited a response of enjoyment for me. I play games to enjoy them, of course. I play games for distraction. I play games to be taken out of the wackiness of the current world going on around us and everything else. And pretty much with the previous entries where I've really just talked about the game, and like in the case of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, just the gameplay, it really just removed me from wherever I was at the time. And that's really where Final Fantasy VII Remake comes in too. Final Fantasy VII, I played the day it came out. It was the first game I ever pre-ordered. I got the t-shirt, I got the strategy guide, I had a receipt that was pretty much faded because I pre-ordered it like 2 years before it came out from a software etc. on 5th Avenue. And I think it was 18th or 19th Street with $5 down. It's not my favorite Final Fantasy, but it holds a very special place in my heart. Final Fantasy VII Remake elicited a sense of nostalgia for me, which is strange because as much as I love 7 and I can tell you like where I was during 7, and I can tell you like I was in 8th grade, I can tell you how I spent a whole week grinding out mobs just so I could buy the lifetime ticket to the gold saucer before I actually continued with the game. I never really felt nostalgia to play it again. But with 7, the remake, it was like I got transported back. Even though it was new and it was done in different ways and certain stuff wasn't the same and certain stuff was added, it made me feel like I was in the 7th, 8th grade again. It made me think of 1997, 1998. I do not know why. Also, in terms of the timing it came out, this was during the whole, hopefully quote-unquote now infamous 2020 lockdown. And being stuck in the house, as it were, because we did unfortunately have a case of COVID within the home. Um, Being able to play this and just be removed out of all of this going on was a godsend. Um, I really enjoyed this game. I think being able to see all these characters, knowing what's going to happen or knowing what's supposed to happen, and my fiance just watching, being like, "Oh, like Cloud and Aerith are really cute," or "Oh, so Tifa's the one you have the hots for." I go, "Yeah," and she's like, "Yeah, she's pretty." And then I showed her what Tifa originally looked like, and she was like, "Oh my god, like you thought that was hot? Like ew, like pixels, like ew." But I was like, "Listen, you have to understand. Like I was a kid and all this other stuff." But seeing how they were able to take several hours of one part of a disc and just expand it into a full game, and even though I had a rough idea of what could potentially happen, I was still surprised throughout. There were moments where they kept bits and pieces in. Bits and pieces that as a kid I felt were important. When the original game came out, the cutscene that plays when Cloud gets on the motorcycle and, presumably like jumps out the window with it and lands on the highway, and then you go through the whole highway minigame thing, the escape part. At the time, that was cutting edge, and I had saved just before that because I wanted my uncle to see that part, because he was always into the whole technology thing and seeing how far graphics had come and everything else. And I remember showing that to him and just being like, and him just being like, "Wow, like this is nuts coming off of the Nintendo, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And Socrates, if you remember that thing, that was one of those edutainment things. He couldn't believe it. Slight spoiler: they pretty much keep that. They do a little bit different with it, but they make it just as incredible and as amazing. And I teared up. I I was clapping and crying at the same time. I was like, I can't believe they kept almost scene for scene. They kept it almost a little bit better in certain parts, but almost kept it scene for scene. That was huge for me, and that ultimately is why this game actually shot up beyond the original Final Fantasy VII as one of my favorite RPGs. Is the remake better than Final Fantasy VII for me? Yeah, I'll be honest. I think just because it gave me a nostalgic response. It's something I'd never played before because this was it's a remake. How could I possibly have nostalgia other than for the characters? Certain scenes I got nostalgia for. The whole playground thing, fucking waterfall the whole time. Honeybee Inn, I clapped and I laughed that they kept it the way they kept it. Awesome game. Awesome, awesome game. Some people don't like it. I don't give a shit. It's on my list. If you want to talk about tearjerkers, you gotta play yourself some Grandia. Listen, as far as I'm concerned, if it comes to coming of age stories, I'm all in. Grandia has one of the best coming of age stories of all time. Justin and his buddies, Sue and everybody else, are just on a wacky, crazy adventure that could only happen in 90s anime. That's pretty much it. And I'll be honest with you, if this was a 90s anime, I'd still be watching it at 37 years old. This story is so good. The characters are so lovable. Everybody is so much fun. But here's what gets me the most. There's a particular scene in the game, and this is where the elicited response comes in. A character leaves the party. Presumably just says, I think this is as far as I can go. And they leave. And in the grand scheme of things, and as these 90s movies for kids typically go, you figure the person's going to come back at the last minute and save the day. Never happens. They gone. And this is a character that you have spent a majority of the game playing with. And here's where Grandia's best aspect comes forth. As kind of like a bookmark or a bookend to different chapters and critical events, the characters sit around and have dinner together. And you get a little cute animation of everybody saying they're doing this. And you can have conversations with the different characters. They comment on what's going on in the game and everything else. So even if you're really not paying attention to the story beats, or you're just not, you're not grasping any of it, when you have that grassroots down-to-earth conversation where it's just a bunch of kids just talking, you really get attached. And then for one kid to literally grow up and just say, I'm not cut out for this anymore, I'm done. It hurts. It really fucking hurts. And then when you get to the end and you're on the ropes, you're thinking, okay, this is the moment where they're going to come back. This is the moment where they're going to come back. Oh, fuck, the credits, it's over. It hurts. It really hurts. And then when you get to see them again, you feel relief. That's some good fucking storytelling. Now, y'all know I love me some Shin Megami Tensei, but in the grand scheme of things, of all the Persona games, I honestly feel like 3 has probably been the most important one to me. And I've done a video on this. It was pretty much Baby's first, Baby's first RPG right out of living with his parents and not being able to afford electric bills because he thought AC was free. Anyway, Persona 3 FES, which is the version I played originally. I got kind of on a whim. I was downtown with a friend of mine. We were at a GameStop and we were just looking at the PS2 games. And I picked it up and he was like, he's like, I thought you didn't like these games. Because I had told him I actually hate the first Persona game, Revelations. I can't stand it. The original one I can't stand. The remake is a little bit better. But anyway, so I picked up. I was like, I don't know. I just need something to do. And it was $20 brand new. Literally with plastic. Ooh, $20. And I was like, I just need something to do. I started playing it. And I was so intrigued at the whole idea of evokers. I'm not going to do the motion here because YouTube doesn't like certain things. As a matter of fact, you could probably look it up and those videos are probably taken down too. But it was dark. I had never played something as dark as this game before. There was all these different, I guess you could say, aspects of, mommy daddy issues and, self-doubt and mental health and, suicide is involved in there too. But actually that probably killed YouTube's algorithm too. But anyway, going through this game, just seeing these characters, again, very anime tropey, but it had kind of like a episodic feel to it. And that was really good for me with all the social link systems because it helped me establish my own schedule. Since I was living by myself, this was my first time ever living by myself. And I didn't really have, a parent to come in the room and be like, yo, you're sleeping through the alarm again, get up. It was all my responsibility. And this game taught me about responsibility, despite the very depressing backdrop. But here's the other part about why I love Persona 3, presumably. And I say presumably because, honestly, after finishing this game, I bought 4. And I went right through that immediately. I did a sequential thing. I literally spent 100 hours on this game to go spend 80 hours on the next. I was so in love with the battle system. But presumably this one is my favorite because at the end of it, I could not believe the ending. I was like, are you shitting me? Like, this is where they're taking this? Like, I knew there was a 4th game and I saw it's a different cast and crew, but I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is how it ends? And then FES is an epilogue and it's just as dark. And it's, I don't know, it was something I had never experienced before. Between the rogue elements, the random dungeons, not having a party that you could fully control, it really made me think about what I was doing and how I aligned my personas and made me be much more strategic. And the social link system was also something I hadn't experienced before. And it kind of made me think back, man, I really miss high school. Now, I love me a good time travel story. I've been saying this for years and years and years. Reading Historia, when this was announced, I heard about the concept and I bought it day one at presumably a GameStop. It was a GameStop, actually. I had it pre-ordered with $5 down. I didn't play it until like maybe 6 years after it came out. But here's the thing. When I played it, I couldn't put it down. I honestly could not fathom how a game about admittedly much more time travel than Chrono Trigger could pull it off with a sequence of altering timelines for the purpose of creating new timelines or creating a timeline for the purpose of using it to manipulate a previous timeline. Very much a thinking person's game and a very awesome battle system to boot. But here's the whole thing, because it's very just circumstance, and it was eerie, and it was scary, and it has this really amazing piano soundtrack. It now has a remake, which is presumably easier to buy than the original, and it has some tweaks and fixes. I haven't played it yet. I have it. Still waiting for another 6 years. I think I got like 3 to go. But the characters are really good too. And I feel like even though you do have this whole time travel mechanic, where you can reverse negative events, it really harpens back on the fact of, and this is something I really like about time travel storylines, is that even if you reverse it for your own selfish means, you ultimately have to put it back. Like, time wants what it wants. And Radiant Historia is very much like that, unless there's a variable. And that's really what I enjoyed the most about this. Smartly, it let you alter time. All right, top 5. And why the fuck is Suikoden 2 at number 5? All right, so listen. Old school YouTube history lesson here. Back when I first started in 2011, Suikoden 2, which was already a very expensive game, was only like $100, maybe $130 at most complete. And it was the stuff of legend. Suikoden had just been picking up in popularity because obviously more folks were getting into YouTube gaming. And one of my buddies at the time had done a review on it. And he had bought a copy off of eBay and basically beeline through the whole thing. And I actually cut the video off at the end because he basically went from start to finish and I didn't want to get the ending. I didn't buy it immediately. Actually, I got stupid lucky at a pawn shop of all things in Manhattan, which is unheard of, which mostly deal in gold. And I was able to get a deal on it, and I brought it home around the same time I got Catherine, for perspective, because I bought that day one. And I played Catherine first. But then several years later, I played through Suikoden 1, and I really enjoyed it. I was like, how does a game from so long ago still feel modern and, just current? And then a few more years went by, and I eventually played Suikoden 2, because somebody had told me, listen, when you play Suikoden 2, Luca Blight is like the best villain of all time. Because nothing makes this man happy. Nothing is going to stop him. And sure enough, playing through it, I'm like, yeah, man, Luca Blight's pretty fucked up. Like, he's serious. But here's the whole thing with Suikoden 2. You feel like shit the entire time because there is a friendship that is literally torn apart by war, as these things do. And it's only through, we'll say, a loss that it starts to come back together. And even then, it's not really coming back together. And being in this whole backdrop and basically just creating like the super team of the 108 stars really makes you feel not only like a superhero or like I guess you could say like not a warlord but like a hero, or at the very least a leader. It just makes you want to bring back a piece of home. And that's really where I think this story is great. You see that, I've seen that, I've only played through the first 3 games, but the third game has a little bit of that too. It's people ultimately just trying to find their place in the world again. But with the second game, people already have their place in the world, but they can't live side by side. And it hurts. And it's not until the ending where you're just like, depending on which ending you get, of course, where you're just like, man, I really hope they figure this out. What bullshit is this? That Uttara Romano, Mask of Deception, Mask and Truth are effectively taking up the 4th spot when you said no visual novels. Okay, listen, there's a strategy RPG in here. Admittedly, it is not as much strategy RPG as it is visual novel, but this is easily one of my favorite games of all time. And I am saying one of my favorite games because they are literally directly one after another. They just broke it into 2 games because it is just so big. Now, the good news is, when it came out over here in the States, we got it in pretty much very quick succession. Japan had to wait, because these games are massive. And coming off of the first game, which ends on a very, very tragic cliffhanger with a lot of questions, the second game picks it up and it goes dark. Like, really fucking dark. And it is so much better for it. I have never ever been so invested in a game like this ever, and I would have never even considered it if it wasn't for the RPG Site podcast with the original host, which was Zach Reese. He was playing this game for review, and he mentioned it casually on the podcast, like, oh yeah, I've been playing Uttara Romano, and he just started talking about it, and I was like, I don't know what this is. Quick, Google search, and I go, oh, it's one of those visual novels with the sex scenes that they had to take out because, it's weird in Japan. He was basically going on how the game has a very slow burn, but once you get to the point where everything kind of opens up, you do not want to stop playing it. And I thought, okay, whatever. It's coming out in the Vita, visual novel-ish with an RPG. Even said, like, there's a strategy RPG in there by Sting. And I'm like, oh, I love Sting. And he's like, but it's not super deep. And I'm like, who cares? It's Sting. So, playing this, I will say with this game, if you do ever intend to play any of these, Uttara Romano, I think it's Mask of Deception, which is the first one if I remember right. The intro-ish area of about, I'll say 10 or 12 hours is a lot of slice-of-life stuff and a lot of heavy descriptions about food, which you think have no place in anything, but in the grand scheme of things, you realize how basic and simple the main character is. Not as a person, just he has basic loves of life. And he is thrust into a position that he is technically not prepared for. And you get to see him grow into it. But here's the whole thing and why this is even on the list. I have never, ever finished a game where, upon finishing it, I immediately said, where's part 2? I normally am like, thank God, I need a break. I was like, I need part 2 now. I need to see what's going on. I want to find out what happened with Haku and everybody else. Like, I'm not accepting this. This is bullshit. And the second game goes into this whole other dark realm, and basically where Haku is now, he can't be that simple person anymore. And it's sad because the personality and you can see the confliction. You can definitely see it's like, I have to be like this. I have to be like this. I can't be true to myself. And as somebody who always says, like, or at least tries to say, speak your mind, say what you're thinking, don't hold it in, that hurts. Because I'm like, dude, no, like, you feel the pain he's going throughout this whole thing. And even when you get to the end and the finale, and you do get some sort of relief and reprieve, you just want to cry. It's because it's never going to be the same. I cannot begin to tell you how psyched, how excited, and how blown away I was by this game. As somebody who grew up in the 80s, all of the references got me right here. As somebody who loves time travel stories, got me right here. As somebody who, truthfully, has a little bit of a love for alternative history, right here. As somebody who likes actual history, right here. Somebody who likes giant fucking robots, definitely right here. This game hit every single note of every single thing that I thought was great. The storyline was excellent. Again, you may be saying, Alex, this is a visual novel again. No, there's a strategy RPG in there, admittedly a little bit less than the previous game, but hey, it's in there, so what? It's really just a module to continue the story, but I love the way that this game presents itself. There's different timelines, and it stops you from beelining. It basically will say, no, you can't do this anymore. You have to do this, this, and this, and then potentially you could do that. The story is very difficult to follow, and that is probably one of its greatest strengths, because it's a difficult story to follow, but it does an excellent job at setting you right on the story and helping you be able to line things up. And the reason why, besides this being one of my favorite games and my game of the month of the year last year, was because when I went in, I knew very basic time travel, giant robots, bunch of high school kids, 80s Japan. I thought this would be fun and exciting. I didn't expect it to go this deep. I didn't expect it to make me laugh. I didn't expect it to have references to things I remember as a kid. I also didn't expect it to teach me things. I also just didn't expect it to make my mind go... I also didn't expect it to make me actually want to buy, like, a statue. I have never been a statue guy. I didn't buy it, but I've genuinely have been tempted because of some of the characters in this. And ultimately, this game also did something that no other game has ever done for me. At one particular moment in time in this game, right at the beginning, Yep, I am definitely going to like this. Now, even though I said this is still technically my favorite game of all time and it's not number one, of course it has to be on the list. Come on. Final Fantasy IV or 2 or whatever the fuck you want to call it is a very important game to me. It's a very important game to me through my developmental period of life and just time and place. As a kid, I really didn't like reading until I played this game. What had happened was my dad was trying to get me to learn how to ride a bike, and I didn't own a bike, and honestly to this day I still don't know how to ride a bike, right? So he took me to a bike shop. It was like a small mom and pop bike shop, and the bike shop owner's son, I guess, spent the summers there. Basically they didn't put him in camp, but he was a little bit older than me, but not by much. He basically sat in the back and played video games all day, and he had Final Fantasy II. And when I went over, the bike shop owner introduced me to him. And he was just sitting there with small CRT, just grinding away. And it was one of those things where I just couldn't believe it because I was like, how is this fun? How is this engaging? How is this anything exciting? You're just watching little men do, and then numbers fly around. Then he started to describe the whole story to me. And I was intrigued. And I was like, so how do you find out all this? He's like, oh, well, you got to read it. And number one is the most fucking expensive game of all time. All right, so Panzer Dragoon Saga, very different than your typical RPG. Very different from your typical Panzer Dragoon game. I do not own a US version of this. I own the Japanese version, which even now I understand is climbing in price because people want to own something that is Panzer Dragoon Saga, or Azel, as it's known over there. When I played this game, it took a lot of doing for me. I had to get my Saturn modded, which I did myself, basically just ripping out the ejection button so I could do a disc swap. I had to figure out a way how to do it with the RAM cart so that way I could actually save my data because I didn't want to risk losing it. And it became a whole big process because on top of this, I want to own a legitimate copy of the game, so I had to import that. All of this to be done for me to literally sit here next to this laptop at the CRT and play this game over the course of several weeks. And I gotta tell you, it was probably one of the most magic experiences in gaming I've ever had. Like, when Johnny Millennium talks about these instances where it's like a euphoria, I had that with Panzer Dragoon Saga. Like, he's not talking nonsense. This is legitimate. It legitimately happens. And here's the thing. This game could have come out 2 weeks ago, and it would have had the same response from me. It is old. It still felt new. It was responsive. It felt modern. It looked and pushed technology. You could see the Saturn in those graphics, like chugging to do it. Not chugging in terms of frame rate. It was still pretty solid, but you could tell it was pushing it to the absolute limit. The game is like 4 or 5 discs, I think, and the first disc is nothing but cutscenes, which is amazing for the time, and made up dialogue. If you have any way to play this game, any method, I don't care if it's emulation, I don't care if it's legitimate, I don't care if it's burned or what have you, you got to do it. It is probably one of the most unique things you will ever play, and you're doing yourself a disservice by not playing it. And after I finished it, literally all the tearing apart, all the gutting, all that stuff was completely worth it. And I've never been able to say that about any game that I have had to go through a trial and tribulation process to get to run. Panzer Dragoon Saga is and will always be one of the most unique gaming experiences I have ever had. There it is, 25 RPGs, the top 25, with the criteria being that it had to actually make me excited about something. Now, is it legitimately my full top 25 for the rest of my life? No, probably not. I'll be completely honest. But here's the thing, though. With these lists and with these games, in some instances, aren't even the best in the series, technically. But the experience is the best in the series for me. I've been Alex, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take it easy.